Napoleon Total War needs to be remastered. You heard it right. And why a remaster? Well, it's quite obvious. The game is in dire need of an upgrade in terms of graphics and fixing a ton of bugs that have been left over since 2010. It is by far holding up from Empire even to this day and can produce some of the most atmospheric battlefields of the Napoleonic era known to mankind. It would also deserve a remake of the campaign, which I always felt was initially restricted due to following Napoleon's role as a leader and general. In hindsight, you had the Italian campaign, which almost felt like a mini campaign. Having to deal with the Sardinians and the Austrians was fun and challenging at the same time, but the scope to never go to Vienna itself was disappointing. You had the Egyptian campaign, while being authentic to its period, did feel limited. It felt as if I was playing a saga title nowadays, or what passes for it. Napoleon's time in Egypt could have been significantly different, and the campaign didn't follow of what Napoleon did domestically and internationally in Egypt, which would be different in a remake. And Europe was a campaign that felt stale in a way, squashed, narrow, not even bigger than Empire, not allowing for the epic battlefields of Europe to come alive. You could see that environments were copy-pasted wherever you fought, and there wasn't much diversity. So, in this video, I'm going to be discussing the reasons as to why Napoleon needs to be remastered in 2024. I think Napoleon was a golden child of Total War that time forgot. And let's not forget that in 2010, two favorable reviews, receiving overall positive feedback, and it was noted that it did fix many areas of Empire, having better visuals, fixing many of the bugs and pathfinding from the original game. But it still introduced a plethora of bugs of its own. Stability in terms of playing your campaign, the system switch between playing a 32 campaign or a 64-bit campaign. Napoleon was geared more for 64-bit than it was geared for a 32-bit engine. And while I'm pointing that out, let's say that the art style of this game was also praised because the developers themselves said that they had gone for an oil style painting with the depiction of battles, and I think they really captured this really well. The battles themselves were fun. Having an encouraging multiplayer scene back in 2010 was very active. It's still active, but not as active as it used to be back then. The battlefield maps were also great in tactical advantage and strategic depth. However, the game, as I've said, already had those weaknesses. If you fought a garrison in a city, you'd be facing against militia. Now, to be fair, Napoleon does, in some parts of the campaign, have garrisons which are actual armies you can fight against. But even when you were besieging a city, you besiege a city, you had this army, the battle never felt like a Napoleonic siege. It felt more like two armies squashed together and the AI can't form a single line. So sieges weren't really fun for me at all. And often you weren't besieging a city, you were besieging like small towns, a couple of houses here and there. You were never besieging a real city. Most of the battle maps or the city battle maps didn't even resemble Paris or London or anything like that. Now, of course, I can see why they did this because, in one sense, most of the battles of the Napoleonic era were mostly fought in land, or in the oceans, or in the mountains, or whatever it was. You never had troops like fully enter a city or storm a city unless it was like a town or a village or something really that important, or something like Moscow. Most of the time, if enemy troops marched into a town, they'd be marching in parade, like Napoleon's troops when he entered, in 1812. So battle maps felt a bit repetitive, and there wasn't much variety in terms of having more diverse environments, because Napoleon was not just fighting in Austria. His soldiers were fighting almost in every part of Europe. They were in Naples, they were in the Balkans, they were in Germany, they were in Spain, and they were all around. So I really do think that there needs to be a rework and a remaster of the actual battle maps. The only one that did feel kind of alright was Salamanca, but I don't think that's truly accurate to what Salamanca is in reality. Now, if Napoleon were to be remastered, then it deserves more. It deserves unique specific maps for the cities of Europe. If some maps are copy-paste, fine. I don't expect a video game to have every single unique city because that would take hundreds and thousands of hours. But I would like to see the unique cities of Europe to be remade. So if I besiege Berlin, if I besiege Paris, if I besiege Madrid, then I want some variety. I don't want it to be like a complete siege because cities at this time were really massive. Now what I do want is something akin to Warhammer, something akin in the sense that you will besiege a portion of the town, but that portion will be accurate towards its real life historical counterpart. I would like to see more smaller and accurate cities and villages to be remade. I would also love to see at least one or two unique maps. Let's say the Siege of Paris or the Siege of London. That would be nice. The Siege of Vienna, for example. So we can have more battlefields that have more variety in terms of foliage, terrain, and garrisonable buildings. To have redefined battle maps that resemble the era far more. And plus, I would like to see a slower pace of combat when it comes to sieges, when it comes to moving troops in the terrain of mud, when it comes to besieging artillery, and when it comes to besieging towns, even having street fights. Garrisonable buildings that you can have street fights in, I think is something that should be brought back into the series. And it should be redefined, to be honest. When I'm talking about the slower pace of combat, what I'm talking about is that in the vanilla game, often infantry units will fire at each other with musket-accurate weapons. That is basically the equivalent of 1863 American musket technology. Not like that. You will have at least 2 infantry battalions engage with each other, and maybe after 3 to 10 minutes, then they will start to destroy each other because muskets were not accurate at this time. For example, look at the speed at which Napoleon's army fought in Europe. His army would march in at least 2 weeks. An Austrian or Prussian or Russian army would take 4 to 5 weeks. And of course, that pace would have changed by the time of 1813 when the coalition armies actually adopted Napoleon's model and were able to catch him when needed. But at the same time, we should also look at how these battlefields need to be created. I want more ditches. I want more terrain obstacles. I want that if artillery is stuck in a pit, it can't do anything. If artillery is stuck in the mud and it's raining, you can't really fire. You need these natural obstacles. It's the small things that add up. A recreation of some of the famous battlefields such as Aspern, Essling, Friedland and Waterloo would be an epic undertaking, and I'd love that. I would love the battle maps to be actually remade to have a much larger focus rather than have a smaller focus, and to be much larger, to have a points-based system alongside capture points and buildings that you can take. But so far, I would say this would be a good move. However, let's have a look at this. An official remake is needed and it is long overdue, because Napoleon still suffers from weak AI in battlefields where the AI can't just form a single line. Napoleon still suffers from weak AI in battlefields that to this day can't form a single line, and this issue is carried from Empire Total War. Diplomacy is limited. It doesn't feel like a representation of the era where you had treaties, where you had all forms of agreement, and it really carries on from Empire with not much to do. So I can trade one technology, they can trade another technology. To this date, if I want an extortionate amount of gold, all I need to do as France is very simple. Keep Hanover for maybe at least 5 to 10 turns, and once I have done that, then basically go to the Prussians, say that, okay Prussia, here's this region, now give me 100,000 gold. And Prussia gives me everything. Right? That ruins the fun. Hanover was such an important area of this conflict with the war against Prussia that they didn't really remove it. So this is stuff that I'm talking about, where you need smarter AI to engage with you. Better diplomatic options so you don't need to take advantage of it. More better AI in battlefields that actually do form a straight line. Otherwise, if you fight a battle with, let's say, a multiplayer guy, it feels so unique. It feels like you're actually fighting a proper. And finally, I think Napoleon Total War would have benefited from a larger campaign map that encompassed what Empire Total War was trying to achieve. And the Napoleonic Wars, as I pointed out, was a global conflict. It wasn't merely fought in Europe, and many of Napoleon's former family members that did survive after Napoleon's passing in 1821, they did become emperors. They did launch expeditions into Mexico, and I'm talking about Napoleon III. And of course, I want a campaign that has more greater narrative, a campaign that balances narrative and sandbox together, but it also combines greater AI. So greater AI, better diplomacy, and when you play multiplayer, there should be more stability in terms of playing the game. If a player drops out, he can rejoin again. There should be more fixes to pacing, more fixes to the pacing of multiplayer matches, and this would be a golden age, I think, if Creative Assembly wanted to recreate the multiplayer scene in Napoleon. Because the Napoleonic era is not just an era for hardcore gaming enthusiasts or people that love the era. Napoleon is a man that fascinates everybody, and I think it's just going to be absolutely great. Now I could have gone more in depth into this. I'd love to see a campaign that will focus on the Americas, the Asians. I'd love to see a campaign that would focus on America, the Asias, everywhere basically. A bigger campaign map would at least allow me to okay, so Napoleon invades in 1812, then he goes all the way to kick the Brits out of India. What the Indians do is they do the alternate campaign, but it's just a bigger world map. And who doesn't want a bigger world map? You can even see on the screen right now, the map of Europe is so squashed. I mean, I want to revive Ottoman fortunes. I want to do different things. So there's a lot of that factor involved. And everyone from the Total War Reddit to the Total War Discords always find a common consensus the campaign needs to be bigger. I always wanted the Egyptian campaign to be much bigger, to at least have a bit more oomph. It just felt so small and limited, and we just need more. Napoleon's bigger scope would allow you to create an alternate history that never happened, because that's what Total War is about, right? A massive giant sandbox game in which you change history. So if Napoleon succeeds in his 1812 campaign according to the rules of the vanilla campaign, what then? So let's go beyond the alternatives. Let's create an actual remake or an actual remaster. And when I mean going beyond the alternatives, I'm saying defy it. Why don't we have something from 1792 all the way to 1821 and then extend the years after that? Because you have the 1830 riots, you have Napoleon becoming a great leader. Maybe you can go and conquer America, maybe you can go and conquer XYZ. I don't think limiting Napoleon to Europe was a good idea in the first place, and that's what fans regret about it. So at the end, I really do think that if they do go into the multiplayer system, they could literally have the same system as before, but just add a few tiers, a few new maps, a few new areas, and the land battle maps should be utilized a lot. Placing cannons on crucial gaps on the hill, fight multiple nations in history that never fought each other. That's what a remake or a remaster would be. I do wish at the end, however, that we got more mountain style maps, more different varieties, and bigger maps, because in vanilla Napoleon, the cannons and muskets are designed to destroy a man within an instant. Now I can understand that, because morale routes quickly and shooting ranges are rapid and fast, and not as slow-paced. In reality, the footage I've shown you is from NTW3, a fantastic multiplayer mod, I believe one of the best. It is the best representation of how battles were fought. A fight between an infantry versus an infantry unit will take 2-3 volleys before they decimate each other. But in the vanilla game, muskets are not as accurate as depicted. If there was one thing I would want from NTW3 is that, let's have more larger battlefields, as I've said, have over 10,000 units, have more accurate style units, more regiments, and this is what I want. And I also want voice chat to return. Voice chat multiplayer, actual, and in one sense, it would be an essential remake of the Napoleonic Wars. As I've said, the game needs quality of life features, units stuck in pathfinding. The game struggled itself to have good screen resolution for 4K, can be limited in that aspect. So a lot of stability and technical changes in terms of AI would be really good. And the ability to rework the multiplayer servers would be absolutely amazing. We need better loading screen times, because that's the difference between loading into a game or multiplayer and alt tab and boom, the game crashes. In fact, bring some of the multiplayer systems from Warhammer 3 and put it here. I think there's something that could be done here. And so that is my case. A possible remaster for Napoleon would potentially include the possibility of expanding its core engine, implement new graphics to improve what will eventually is becoming outdated, to make a mod manager similar to Rome 2, so that you don't have to install every single mod and then uninstall the game every single time to make it work. So you can play the American Civil War Total War mod with NTW3 just by clicking and doing whatever. A Steam Workshop implementation would be great. Now I do not know if Napoleon will ever become remastered. What I do know is older Total War games were made on older hardware and lesser res. What I do know is this: older Total War games were made on older hardware and lesser resolutions, including leaving an ungodly amount of bugs and never having great AI. What we need is remastering these old games to the newer generation of players that will be introduced to What do we need right now is remastering these older games to the new generation of players that will be introduced to Total War. I'll give you a personal anecdote. Between 2010 and 2012, when I was in school, I played this game for a long time. It was my escapism, and it was such a great game that it completely immersed me into it. So for those newer players that will play for the next generation, Napoleon Remastered is going to be exactly that. So Napoleon Total War was really the penultimate Total War for me, because while the campaign didn't really focus that much, the way the battles were represented made me feel as if I was Napoleon Bonaparte conquering the entirety of Europe, conquering where leaders such as Ceasar had done before. A remaster or a remake at the same time, meaning deciding where they decide to go, would offer the possibility to remake Napoleon into a much bigger figure, and I would absolutely welcome a remake or a remaster. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you will join me in bringing an argument to remake or remaster, and if you don't, let me know as well. But we desperately also need historical Total War to make. Remastering Total War games I believe is crucial and is a no-brainer, and I want to know your opinion, and I will try and respond to every comment. So let's discuss. Thank you, goodbye, and don't forget to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe.